Ready when you are.
Missy, Mutos, the Maldivarium. All on this week's sequeltastic season finale of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast that's useful for detecting ion-charged emissions, with your hosts John West
and Matt Needer. Tonight, the Fourth Doctor and crew find themselves in a land of confusion, where the clam lies down on Broadway and nursery crimes are committed by a diabolical mastermind who can't dance. We get in too deep with Genesis of the Daleks.
And it's time for the long-awaited Bugs crossover episode, while the Doctor puts his hand on Davros's pipes to make the old man smile one last time. Will Colony Sarf deliver his message, or just show everyone his snake? We pick a card, any card, and settle for the Magician's Apprentice and the Witch's Familiar.
Hello, John.
Matt, how are you?
I'm all right. We made it.
Finally.
The season finale.
Yay!
They said we couldn't do it. They said we couldn't commit to a release schedule.
They
to
said,
be fair, we haven't put this out yet. So
they said we wouldn't do it. I don't think anyone was suggesting we couldn't do it. Did they
say whether we should do it?
No. Nobody thought we would. I think that was it.
Well, look, this has been a bold experiment in time management for us, but we have made it to episode 6, the finale of season 3 of I'll Explain Later.
Pulse-pounding finale.
The pulse-pounding series finale of I'll Explain Later. It's been emotional, but we'll see whether that can also be said of the stories tonight.
And we have two I think they're both, very highly regarded, very high-profile stories.
Very high-profile stories, and we're starting, I think, it's been a good season for big hitters. We've picked off the Green Death, we've done the Robots of Death, but tonight, possibly the big one, Genesis of the Daleks.
Yep.
The legendary story whose TX dates I do not have to hand. John, when did this go out?
So this went out between the 8th of March and the 12th of April 1975. Obviously features as part of season 12, so you got Philip Hinchcliffe kind of at the helm with Robert Holmes as the script editor, and perhaps giving a bit more than a polish to this.
Well, let's discuss.
Because obviously it's written by...
It's written by Terry Nation, TV's Terry Nation. Yes, I mean, look, if you're listening to this, you don't need us to explain what happens in Genesis of the Daleks, but I'm going to summarise it anyway. Basically, the Time Lords send the Doctor and Sarah and Harry on a mission right back to the early days of the... I was going to say early days of the Khalid War. It's not really. It's the late stages of that war. It's pretty much like the end of it, basically.
Yeah.
In order to try and avert the creation of the Daleks, with the Time Lords fearing that there's one day going to be a time when they are the dominant species of the universe. So whilst on the planet Skaro, the Doctor meets Davros, the creator of the Daleks, for the first time, and attempts to avert their creation. As we said, it's one of the big guns. It is an absolute classic. It's very highly regarded. Yeah,
I mean, I to the extent that in the early 90s, when I first got to grips with Doctor Who, I recall, I think the consensus shifted at some point around the 90s and the noughties, around Caves of Androzani being the kind of the best. I seem to remember, certainly in the early days that of my... knowledge of the show, that this was considered the greatest story. I think a lot of people would probably still have it in their top, at least in their top 10, right?
Yeah, and if it tops a poll these days, no one's gonna raise an eyebrow.
They wouldn't bat an eyelid.
They wouldn't bat an eyelid. But will they be batting their eyelids at our response to it, John? First of all, I'm going to ask you, when you've seen this before, haven't you?
Several times.
What did you make of it then, and what do you make of it now?
Well, I'm pretty sure this was in the run of repeats that they did in the early 90s, or the mid-90s, right? I'm pretty sure this went out again on BBC Two at some point on a Friday evening. if I'm making that up, I apologise, because my memory some 30 years later is not what it was. But I think that they showed this in our Doctor Who club at school.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure it was repeated. I have a very clear memory of seeing Liz Sladen climb up that tower. Oh. No laughing in the cheap seats. I have a very clear memory of her climbing up that tower next to the rocket in my living room. I mean, not her doing it in my living room. Obviously, that would be tremendous.
Although the way they re-edit that cliffhanger, it might be more dangerous.
Well, indeed, yeah. So, but yeah, I remember watching that on the television, on a cathode ray tube television in my living room back in the day. Obviously, not back when it came out. This would have been pretty much 20 years later, I suppose. And I really, really enjoyed it at the time. I really enjoyed it at the time. And I guess I was old enough. Yeah, I was old enough. I was old enough to sort of be able to clock the Nazi allegory. It's not subtle.
No,
I mean,
no.
We're once again in the Garth Marenghi territory of I know writers who use subtext, and those people are cowards. Something I have said before.
Oh, this is all text.
Yeah, this is all text. Nonetheless,
to the point where I understand that that Peter Miles's like insignia that he has on his uniform, it disappears between episodes 3 and 4 because everyone thought, like, actually this is a bit too on the nose to literally have him dressed in a Nazi uniform, which is what he...
I mean, I don't think insignia or not wasn't really the difference between being able to clock whether this was a Nazi allegory or not. I mean, I love this. I think it's absolutely first class. I think it's really amazing. I think the... as I say, it isn't subtle, but it's not sort of comically heavy-handed either. It plays the allegory brilliantly, and you see how those ideas of fascism, of Nazism, of racial purity, how they sustain themselves, how they take people with them, and at the heart of it is and we've talked about this before on this podcast, Karl Popper's paradox of tolerance. Right? If you show compassion, if you show mercy, if you show accommodation, I mean, right at the sort of near the end when Garman is trying to still negotiate with Davros, and you think, no, just bloody shoot him, press the bloody button, get rid of it all. Which even Davros at the end tries to do, right? Even he's trying. You can't negotiate with that evil. And Terry Nation, with a little bit of help from Robert Holmes, seems very preoccupied with the idea that you don't negotiate with Nazism. You don't back down to it. You don't try and reason with it. You just fight it. You just fight it. And the moral questions around that are fascinating. But he doesn't seem to... I know we're going to get to the very famous, do I have that right, where the Doctor has the opportunity to kill them, which in the end he does anyway, but by the by, do I have that right and all that sort of stuff, and do I make myself as bad as them and that sort of thing, but I think there's a very running thing. Like, no, you just have to defeat evil. You have to. And you have to shut it out and you have to have eternal vigilance. I mean, right at the very end there, the very end of it is the Daleks shut in the bunker saying, Christ, we're right down to the allegory doesn't pull its punches in terms of what it's up to. But they will say, we will prepare, we will, and it's very, very clear. And the Doctor says, out of their evil must come something good. But like it's that thing of the price of our freedom, our liberty, the price of the diversity that you have of those who are fighting the Daleks. You've got the Thals and the Mutos forming a sort of coalition with the Doctor and the arrivals from out of town, right? That diversity that kind of seals them in and locks them up. It only locks them up for a certain amount of time because they will be back.
Yeah.
That evil always resurfaces, and the price of the freedom and the diversity and the compassion and mercy in the world is constant vigilance and the necessity to tool up and face this down with all means. And it does not. as I say, it's not subtle, but it's not heavy-handed in the way it deals with this. I think the characterization is fantastic. I think the direction by David Maloney is really sharp, and especially when you consider that there's not like, a huge amount of location work beyond, I think, episode 1, maybe episode 2. Well done, by the way. I think
it's extremely striking, that location
very
work.
striking.
I mean, in terms of just the grim. I mean, it's the Doctor Who quarry, but it's the grimmest use of the Doctor Who quarry.
I don't know. It's horrific. The use of the use of that is and the use of the space, and even like the initial shot of the bloody, ivory tower milquetoast bastard with the Time Lord with wearing the jester's hat thing, and the way it kind of, he's obviously had to run round and plot as if he's been there the whole time, and all that. But it's really good, and the way that the way even the Time Lord is kind of represented as this kind of meddling kind of. It's a very, very ambivalent figure, that person, a very fascinating figure, and we don't really come back to talk about it. I think this is just spellbinding. I think it's great. I think everyone plays a fantastic part in this, and it fully deserves its reputation. But having seen it for presumably, you've seen it lots of times,
yes,
right?
I've seen it loads.
Does it continue to hold up for you, or is it beginning to get a bit rusty?
Well, here's the thing. It's like I'm going to get to what I think of it via a couple of the points that you raise, I think, which are really, really good. I mean, first of all, you keep saying Nation * with a Robert Holmes polish. And that was my working assumption on what's going on here, because I think, yes, there is a level of sophistication to this that I think perhaps we more readily associate with the kind of writing and characterization that Holmes does than necessarily what Nation does.
Yeah.
I'm going to credit a friend of the show, James Kettle, here with a little bit of background intel that he gave me, which is essentially to say that this is pretty much pure Nation. Robert Holmes had his hands full, frankly, on a lot of the other things he had going on this series, writing The Ark in Space from an aborted script by John Lucarotti, and then heavily rewriting Revenge of the Cybermen. So apparently, if you look at Nation's first drafts of the scripts, they're not wildly different to what ends up on screen. So this is a Nation script. It also, I think, we've been building this argument across the Nation Dalek stories that he is a far more sophisticated writer than perhaps he's given credit for in Doctor Who terms. He is fully committed to he takes in his Dalek stories, he takes World War II as his text and is interested in examining this from every single angle. And I mean,
it's worth remembering, just on the point you just made, we loved the Dalek Master Plan.
Yeah, we loved the Dalek Master Plan,
and the weaved web that it kind of made. He handled lots of different things.
But I remember when we were talking about Planet of the Daleks a few years ago now, sort of saying that sort of in some ways is the archetypal sort of Nation quest mission with a layer of allegory over it. But actually, what he's trying to tell us there in 1973 about World War II is addressing that conflict status in the culture at the time. So if you look at how World War II is memorialised and remembered in popular culture, there's a real drift throughout the 60s away from the sort of the sort of more like films like the Dam Busters, where you've got quite a sort of linear recording of events that happened with a degree of ambivalence as to the moral cost of it all, through to at the end of the 60s you have things like Where Eagles Dare, where already World War II is starting to become sort of boys' own adventure.
Battle of Britain as well, I think, was 69.
Yes, yeah. which are very much that kind of like, we can win it in a weekend, tally-ho, chocks away, kind of, maybe less so Battle of Britain, but like we've sort of moved to a more unsophisticated reading of World War II that is coloured by the fact that Britain won, essentially.
Yeah, and the Second World War is kind of the and maybe just the years after it ever so slightly, they're kind of the foundation myth of modern Britain. Right?
Totally. Yeah, no, I mean, we're still dealing with this today in terms of, but Nation was worried that people were misremembering World War II and what it was all about in 1973. So at the end of Planet of the Daleks, the Doctor gets that amazing monologue where he says, when you go back to Skaro and you tell them what happened here, don't glamorise it, make them understand the cost of what happened. And I think he's directly talking about how, by the 70s, there's been this drift in our understanding of World War II. Here, as you say, it's unsubtle, the allegory, but this is Nation's biggest allegory. This is what he's been building towards, really, in terms of his portrait of war, different aspects of war, the sort of confusing overlay of moral responsibility on war. This is his grandest allegory yet. And I'm I find it interesting that yes, the Nazi aspect is very much on the nose. There's absolutely no doubt who Davros and his sort of coterie of people around him are meant to represent. But if you scale up, and this is obviously fresh on my mind because earlier this year, one of the biggest films of the year was Oppenheimer. And what really struck me this time around was the way in which they describe the foundation of the Davros' elite core of scientists and how they gradually gather power around them.
Yeah.
Have huge parallels to describing the Manhattan Project. They're this sort of elite group of scientists that are called in, given resources, and the project balloons. And on the Khaled side, and, from Davros himself, and also on the Thal side, there's a lot of talk about weapons to end the war. It's like that. It's the Thals who, obviously, when we see them in the Daleks in 1963, are a fully pacifist race, and the Doctor has to persuade them into action to actually fight back against the Daleks. Am I right in thinking it's the Thals who basically commit genocide?
Yeah, they have the Doomsday weapon.
They have the Doomsday weapon, exactly. Yeah. So it's so sophisticated in its allegories because it's not just a simple, these are the Germans, these are the Britons, these guys are wrong, in terms of how it presents two sides of the conflict. I think that's also, so this is 1975, isn't it? Which is like, obviously we're right on the tail end of the Vietnam War, which in terms of the extensive, length and cost of that war, from the mid-60s onwards, has a huge sort of drag effect on cinema and art in terms of how we present war and how we think about it. And I think it's no coincidence that this is a conflict that has supposedly gone on for generations in Genesis of the Daleks. So it's very subtle in how it's teasing out different aspects of both the Second World War and war per se, but to present a very complex, and it's not a simplistic allegory of saying like these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, or even just these are the Britons, these are the Germans. It's a really sophisticated deep dive, I think, on war per se.
Yeah.
All of which is to say, like, I think the ambition and some of the writerly execution on this is absolutely first class, and I think it absolutely deserves its top tier, its status at Doctor Who's top table as a result. I mean, there's stuff in here that's remarkable that we've not seen before or since in it. I have to say, on watching it this time round, I do grate a little bit on some of the execution. And I think it's, having praised, how it can represent some of the best of Terry Nation's work, it also succumbs to, the problems of six-parters, the problems of some of Nation's work as well, in the sort of the quest narrative to essentially extend the plot by another couple of episodes. You mentioned earlier Sarah's a trip up the rocket, which takes best part of an episode. There is an absolute fake-out cliffhanger in the middle of it, which is a real cheap shot.
Yeah.
And then as soon as they get to the top, they're asked to come back down, and they're right back where they started from, which is like... So there is a fair amount of running on the spot. I think outside of the central cast, there are some wildly uneven performances. I think there's a lot of quite plummy men in this doing a turn. That's not to...
Here all day for it. Love it. I mean, I am in David Collins'. We are recording this in David Collins' ex-house.
We're back. We're back where we belong. The heart of the action. So I
really disagree. I really disagree. I think
there are a few bits of this where this did not hold my attention.
I think the performances are great. Well, I'm gonna nail you. I'm gonna nail you down on this one. But no. Go on. You finish.
No, I think that's it. I think it embodies the height where it scales the heights. It scales heights that Doctor Who has not hit before or since. I mean, bits of it are remarkable, and when you get into when it really gets cooking, sort of episodes 4, 5, and 6, where the Doctor and Davros sort of get down to just directly articulating and discussing in incredibly sophisticated terms the moral issues at stake here. And I'm sure there's plenty to tease out here. There are the famous speeches. There's a couple of others that I noted that are also particularly interesting. I mean, it crackles in a way that is unbelievably compelling telly, and Tom Baker and Michael Wisher going toe to toe, and the way you feel the shifting balance of power between them is absolutely remarkable. But I would be remiss in offering in saying that I'm going to offer a full view of this, and saying that there were bits of it that felt a little overextended, I would say.
I think that's probably fair. I do. I think that's probably. I really want to pull you up on these performances. I think the performances are universally good.
Okay.
And I hear what you're saying about some of the sort of plummy rep kind of.
I can't even remember his name, but the leader of the Thals, I can't remember his name.
Yeah, I think that's Michael Lynch.
Okay.
As Thal politician, which it's the opposite of so good they named him twice. It's like he wasn't named.
Didn't even get there once.
Exactly. I agree. He was a little underpowered. But if I think about James Garbutt as Ronson, for example, the first of the scientists to have doubts about the Dalek project, I thought he was great. I thought he was really good. I liked the way he sort of didn't really have the courage of his convictions and was mousy and not quite sure of himself. I thought that Dennis Chinnery as Garman was particularly good.
Oh, yeah. No, he's terrific. And
it's so funny because if I think back, if I dredge through the history of Germany in the early 30s, he's very reminiscent of those conservative characters who think they can still control the kind of far right tendency. There he is right at the end where he's got the guns, he's got the forces, he's got the ultimatum to deliver, and he says, either you stay in charge on our terms, or we'll get rid of you and have an election. But it's still very much you can stay in charge. It's this delusion that you can somehow reason with that kind of politics.
Well, this is something that I want to get into, which is,
or at least it's Nation's writing takes you down the road that's a delusion.
Yes, but what I'd like to discuss is that discussion between Garman and that split between Garman and Davros is not even a split within the Khaled faction, but it's a split within the scientific elite of the Khaled faction.
Yeah.
So we're really narrowing in here, and it's like you, I think, have very shrewdly raised the point on numerous occasions that Doctor Who, at its worst, is very guilty of going, everyone on this planet is like an ideologically amorphous mass. Everyone here thinks this, and this, Jesus Christ, you couldn't even get further. You couldn't get further from that.
Yes.
But we talked about the Underwater Menace a few weeks ago, and obviously in terms of its presentation of the science and its moral responsibilities, that is, I would say, I would argue, hot takes, somewhat less sophisticated than this. But Davros is full fash, but he's also he is a mad scientist in the most interesting sense of it. His commitment to science and the scientific method leads him down an incredibly dark path. But from Garman and the other characters, you have a slightly different view of science. That it's like, science as a consensus-based sort of force for kind of democratic stability. It's
from Garman in that.
Well, yes.
But he only has democracy. Because that's what's so fascinating. I mean, I'm sort of agreeing with you.
Yeah, no, that's the point.
But what I find interesting about Garman is that democracy is the fallback option if his particular brand of autocracy doesn't work. Yeah. It's like he's still very happy for Davros to remain in control if he just abandons this thing, right?
Yeah. But the thing is what Davros is
all about. And I disagree that he's a mad scientist. I mean, obviously...
Sorry, Davros is a mad scientist.
Yeah, no, I disagree that Davros is. I disagree that Davros is a mad scientist. I mean, I know that they play with that trope. And he has to sound like the Daleks.
No,
right?
sorry, I'm not saying he's a mad scientist as in he's sort of one-dimensional, but he is... I'm putting the emphasis on the scientist bit.
Yeah,
Davros is a scientist, but he's gone way further than I think a lot of the other scientists.
But I mean, what I think is really interesting as well is that, obviously we had scientific advances, particularly understanding genetics and so on and so forth. Not the perversion of it, obviously, but we genuinely had a more scientific understanding of that by 1975 than we did in 1945. And what I think is really interesting is Terry Nation sort of takes Nazism to its completely logical conclusion, right? Well, if we're the master race and we're going to only improve, get better, then let's accelerate that through the genetic engineering and create this thing which is divorced of, it has absolutely no compassion, no tolerance of anything else, and it is the logical extension of the fascist mindset, of the Nazi mindset.
So this was the sort of question I was going to ask. So I mean, there's a bunch of famous speeches in this, and the scene between the Doctor and Davros that everyone remembers rightly is where the Doctor puts the hypothetical conjecture, if you could release the virus, blah, blah, blah. There's also the discussion though where Davros claims that the Daleks are a force for peace because the only guarantor of true stability is complete sort of muscularity and domination at the top of the chain.
Hegemony,
yeah,
basically.
Exactly. So Davros is sincere in that, right? But both in... I'm not going to say Davros sincere in his commitment to peace, but Davros believes what he's saying, doesn't he, in that scene?
Yes, he absolutely...
Which is terrifying.
...believes what he's saying. And he's a fanatic. I don't think he's a mad... I know what you're saying, but he's not mad. I mean, it'd be so easy to characterise him as just mad, bad, and dangerous to know. It's like, he's a fanatic. He has a very logical worldview, which when you take each step in turn, gets you to where he is. And he totally believes what he's saying. 100% believes what he's saying, and it's quite different to some of the. It's quite different to some of the. I'm speaking in the context of the UK in 2023.
Yeah,
it's very frustrating to hear anybody espouse exclusionary, fascistic, or hard right views that toy with the kind of the push into this kind of that mindset of politics. But I have to be honest, like when you listen to a lot of conservative MPs, for example, the Tory party conference has just taken place here in the UK. It's very clear that it's a pose. That they're adopting some of these hard right things, but probably if they had a dinner party with their friends.
Do you like it when I do this?
Yeah. It's and that's. I'm not suggesting that that's any less concerning, but
more in a way.
But well, yeah, exactly.
We could end up with this stuff insincerely.
It's what takes us down that road.
Yes,
right?
Totally.
But no, Davros is a complete 100% believer. This is absolute, and so is Nyder. Nyder, he must know. He's not daft. He must know that the end game for them, because it seems the most natural thing in the world is that the Daleks, once convinced of their authority and their development, will have to exterminate them as well. Which indeed, of course, at the end they do.
Yeah.
But he totally believes in it. we get into sort of Marxist realms there, or the discussions of false consciousness, in the sense that it's clearly not in his interest that he develops something that will then turn around and kill him. But he's so committed to that cause that he continues down that, against his own interest.
Well, which sort of does slightly take us back to the mad scientist thing that we discussed in The Enemy of... not in The Enemy of the World, The Underwater Menace.
Yes.
Which is that idea that,
With Zaroff.
Yeah, Zaroff, is like, as soon as you put the idea on the table that you could put in process a scientific method that will destroy the world, it's like, well, probably ought to give this a go.
But Zaroff is mad because he wants to do it just because he can, whereas Davros, he's just not expecting this.
Yes.
He's expecting to still be, well, I'm your creator, I'm the father, therefore, I'll be looked after, I'll be revered. And his creation takes a logical turn, but one he hasn't anticipated.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting because, Nation has sort of said that, the idea for Davros, almost came out of like a dramatic necessity in that, if you were going to have... The Doctor can't have long conversations with the Daleks because they're just not built for that kind of characterization. And so the aim was to create a sort of charismatic frontman, if you like, for the Daleks. But he's such a dense, interesting character. Like, I love the fact that when they arrive on Skaro and they're captured by the Khaleds, and the Doctor starts saying, well, we're not from your planet, we're not from your time, blah, blah, blah. And the response that he gets is that you're stock like, oh, well, that can't be true, you're lying. Davros says there are no other worlds.
This is Guy Siner as Ravon.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll come back to him.
He says, you're lying, this isn't true. And it's interesting, they say, like, Davros knows everything, and he says there aren't other worlds. But when they actually get to see Davros, and the Doctor sort of explains the story, Davros sort of buys it straight away, because he says it's like, the things that you're talking about, I'm paraphrasing him a little bit, but he says, the things you're talking about are beyond my scientific understanding, but my imagination is not so limited to suggest that there can't be things that I don't understand.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, an incredibly sort of nuanced position for him to take. And then, of course, his fanaticism means he immediately tries to seize the advantage by saying, well, you know more about that, you can help feed into the Dalek process by telling me about all the times that they've been defeated. But he's just dramatically such a kind of fruitful creation here, because he moves the narrative on in so many interesting and unexpected ways.
Also, just let a pause for thought on the design work here, because we think it's so easy to think of Davros as fully formed. We will come onto this in the second story that we're going to look at, but just how badass is the chair?
Which obviously is a shocking reveal, and it's the part one cliffhanger, isn't it? Where you just see him there on the shooting range testing the Dalek, and it's like. But again, this is where Nation's
one of the better cliffhangers. It has to be said. Well, it's not really a cliffhanger, but it's one of the better reveals.
It's an extraordinary reveal. But then this is where Nation's B-movie tendencies really come to play, that it's like he's half man, half Dalek. I mean, what an irresistible idea for the creator of the Daleks.
And we've spoken about the conversations between Davros and the Doctor with two completely opposed worldviews and the kind of philosophical back and forth. That wouldn't work without the performances. I mean, Michael Wisher, through all of that rubber, manages to, I think, convey brilliantly the calculation and the fanaticism. I mean, Hitler was very open about the fact that, and Goebbels, it has to be said as well, that manipulation, many extremist politicians on left and right are actually quite surprisingly open about this, that manipulation of people, the use of lies, of shrouded truths, is an important part of getting mass support for your fanatical worldview.
Yeah.
Davros does this time and again.
Yeah.
He absolutely plays people.
He's such a sophisticated operator of people.
Yeah.
It's like,
And he has absolute certainty of...
To the point where he scores... Sorry, it's not just that he secures the annihilation of the Khaleds with the Thal rocket and basically removes all of his kind of domestic... domestic opposition, but he secures a propaganda victory, and like when the people are going around saying Davros is the great peacemaker, it's like it's absolutely extraordinary and sickening to see how well that works.
Yeah, exactly, of course. And Wisher manages to, obviously I give a great deal of credit to Terry Nation for framing the character in that way. This is not someone who's just gone, who this is a real exploration of Nazism and really how these people operate as political operators. And it's sophisticated. So credit where credit is due on the script. But Michael Wisher delivers that brilliantly through, as I say, the layers of rubber and barely,
it's a lot of rubber.
and a quivering hand. I also really want to pay tribute to Tom Baker's performance in this. I mean, he is absolutely outstanding.
Yeah.
There's no mugging. He brings levity and wit, but at every point it's exactly pinpoint perfect.
And there's a real moral urgency to him as well.
Absolutely furious with moral urgency and desperation to achieve something with his task. And I was just so impressed with this. I was also very taken by the TARDIS team. I really like. I really like
Harry. Don't you?
I love Harry.
He's great.
I think he's really good. I also think he's given some great stuff to do. Like in part 1, where the Doctor treads on the landmine, and Harry is the one who helps him out, and he shows real bravery. Like the Doctor says, "Step back. There's no point in us both getting killed." And he said, "No, you're going to have a much better chance if I'm continuing to prop it up." And it's going to be fine because A, I've seen it before, and B, it's the Doctor, right? But
it's episode 1.
It still manages to convey tension even in that scene. It's really amazing. And also right at the end when it's all done, and he just very quietly with a little smile says, "Thank you, Harry." And there's just a look between them that suggests a real rapport. It's just bloody well acted. Sarah Jane has a lot of agency in this. When she is a Thal prisoner, she's not sort of just some, put upon. She's trying to get them up and create agency. Of course, she's the one who creates the firm friendship with the Muto Mogren, I think it is.
No, is it Severin?
Severin, sorry, yes, you're quite right. Severin, played by Stephen Yardley, who again I think that's another great performance. This kind of.
All right, I'm going to withdraw my comment on performances. It's mainly that Thal guy,
but Stephen Yardley as Severin, I think is really outstanding, and just this gentle authority, and he's the Mutos are mistreated by both the Thals and the Khaleds, and yet he is willing to. He defends Sarah Jane from the other Mutos. He's willing to entertain the idea of a better world where there is greater accommodation and acceptance. And he does it with this gentle authority and a constant kindness towards Sarah, which never veers into any kind of creepy, like he loves her or that kind of stuff. He's just a stand-up guy.
Yeah.
And I thought his performance was great. I think there's a lot to love in this. The set designs are fantastic. I love the rocket and the scaffold. Slightly interminable though it is. There's caves, there's control centers. There's
the giant clam.
The giant clams, plural.
Yeah.
Because the Doctor gets trapped in one. Is it Doctor or Ian? I can't remember. Harry, sorry, not Harry. Ian. He's fulfilling quite.
I was going to say you can see the dramatic archetype.
Yeah. But also like the initial shot at the beginning of part 1 with the platoon with the I say the platoon shot. I mean like as in the film Platoon, where the slow-mo of the machine gun down. There's even some point
which
of
is
view.
as bleak as openings of Doctor Who
as bleak as Doctor Who gets.
Yeah.
I mean, there's even some like point of view shake as they're running along. I think this is just spectacularly handled.
Yeah.
And, there isn't a lot more to say in terms of what this is doing and the thematic meat that because it's obvious, but it's not done Nazis bad, good guys good. It's layered, and it tells you how these people operate, how they get under the skin, how they manipulate people.
There's nothing remotely jingoistic about it at all, like on any level. It's like, and which I think is, as I say, speaks to how sort of multi-layered that Nation's not letting anyone off the hook here.
No.
I mean, I agree. There's like it's a standout. I want to talk a bit about the famous scene where. Well, actually, there's several famous scenes, but the famous scene I'm talking about, obviously, is the
I have that right?
Yeah, exactly. The Doctor's crisis of conscience, when he's literally there with the two pieces of wire that could destroy the Daleks, and
there's one person in that scene who has absolutely no doubt about what he should do.
That's Sarah.
Sarah,
yeah. So this is sort of what I wanted to get at, was like, I mean, the Doctor's crisis of conscience is fascinatingly played here. Tom Baker acts it brilliantly, and it's a really interesting sort of book, because there's such a the plot is so moving you towards that point where the Doctor can push the button, and then he says "whoa" when he gets there, and it's literally two flimsy little pieces of wire. If it was a big sort of plunger or detonator or something, it wouldn't be nearly so effective. Do you think this? Do you think it ducks the issue? Do you think it sets up a more interesting issue and then ducks it, in terms of, well, there's a dramatic contrivance why he's not going to touch the wires at that point, and then he decides he will go back and do it, and then in the end it's the Dalek that runs over it. Do you think it sort of it goes down this route, and then? I mean, it goes dramatically as a piece of narrative. It sort of ducks the issue that it sets up.
I don't think so at all. I think to duck it. I mean, the best way to duck it would be for it to not be considered a moral quandary. Like, I think the Doctor. I think this little segment playing as a morality play. I mean, you don't. I think it's a bit rum to accuse Doctor Who of or Terry Nation or this serial of ducking the question when they've asked the fucking question. Like it's like they can't. It's not to duck the question. I know. Yeah. I guess I say you're saying, is it a game of knockdown?
I'm not making a point, by the way. I'm asking a question.
Is it a game of knockdown? Well,
I don't think it does.
No, is it a game of knockdown Charlie? Well, they're knocking on the door and running away, which interestingly enough, Michelle Gomez references in the next story. But no, I don't think it is. I think that they fronted up that question. It's not like it's subtly suggested or we're reading it. They came with that question. And then the Doctor decides, actually, no, the only thing he can do is go back and do what he needed to do. And then the Dalek does it for him. And I think that there is something, out of their evil must come something good. There is something in this worldview that contains within it the seed of its own destruction.
Yeah.
If the forces of good can be strong enough to at least create this, because that idea that there is a monopoly of wisdom, that there is a monopoly of good, that there is only one right way of doing things, and that must be held to the exclusion of anybody else or minority concerns or anything else, it does contain within it that the seed of its own destruction, if the forces of good can just plant it. And so I think it's completely appropriate that the Dalek does that itself, because in a way that evil has the ability within it to sow its own destruction.
Hello, so following on from my Genesis SP12 video, this is going to be the second and last Genesis video I do with this JD800 that used to belong to Tony Banks. And this is what he used on tour throughout the 1990s, and it's still got his tour patches in it. So this is going to be really simple. All I'm going to do is just go through those patches and see what he was using at the time. Okay, so let's show you the first sound on here. It is called IT. Immediately the Genesis fans amongst you know what that is. I'm going to do a terrible rendition of it. Excuse my playing, but you should still be able to recognise what it's supposed to be.
Quite enjoyed that synth stuff. Moog operator, Moog operator. No,
I spend a lot of time on synth YouTube.
Yeah, well, I can vouch for that. Listeners, both of you, he's not lying. Now, typically we wouldn't recall the the serial that we just reviewed, but given that the next one is basically a sequel anyway, I'm going to allow it. I'm going to allow it.
Yeah, it's the sequel special.
Because I did say I was going to come back to Guy Siner.
Yes.
Now, Guy Siner obviously turns up in this as the kind of first guard that takes Sarah.
In Genesis.
In Genesis. That takes Harry and the Doctor. And he is in the kind of the normal military, right?
Yeah.
So basically, there's the division between the SS-like Noida crew and the... So this means that Guy Siner is basically destined for the rest of his life to play the nicest Nazi in the room, because obviously he then goes on to play Lieutenant Gruber in A Lower Low for 10 years and numerous stage performances. And I believe you can still meet Guy Siner in a Wehrmacht uniform at a convention probably near you at some point soon. Good luck, fair play to him and all the rest of it. But it just struck me as funny that he plays basically the nicest Nazi in this, and also probably the nicest Nazi in A Lower Low. He's not really a Nazi. He's an army officer. But
so are we waiting for Big Finish to knit together these two continuities into the epic crossover special?
I've not seen them in the same room. Are we entirely certain it's not the same character? Yeah, there was a lot of Time Lord activity. Maybe he had some fun with the time ring. Aficionados of A Lower Low will sort of understand.
Has Vicky Michelle ever been in Doctor Who? Anyway.
Write in. Let us know. Okay.
Anyway.
Moving on.
So, Genesis of the Daleks, Stone Cold Classic. Who would possibly think to try and attempt a sequel to it? Well, to be fair, Terry Nation did a few years later with Destiny of the Daleks, so that's a line of argument I'm immediately going to demolish. But we are going to fast forward quite a few years into the modern series, into the second Capaldi series, the opening two-parter of Series 9, The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar. John, when did these go out?
So, as you mentioned, 2 episodes. So they went out between the 19th and the 26th of September 2015. Directed by Hetty MacDonald, who I'm sure we're going to, whose work we're going to come on to, I think, a bit later in discussion of how this looks and how this runs. September 2015, a cool, 8 years ago now?
Yeah.
It doesn't feel that long ago.
No,
I feel like this went out very recently.
Yeah,
so it caught me up a bit of a surprise that it was as long ago as that.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, it's a previous era of Doctor Who, and we've got to the end of the subsequent era now as well. And I think for some years this podcast had a reputation as being the Moffat bashing podcast. I think we've been very critical of the Stephen Moffat era for a long time. And then we received a punishing lesson in the Chris Chibnall era of being careful what you wish for.
Yes.
It would also be fair to say, I think, setting out cards that I think we've always preferred the Peter Capaldi run to the Matt Smith run.
Yeah.
And I think I probably go slightly further than you in saying that I generally really like the Capaldi era, with a few reservations of things that don't work, and a few blind alleys that it goes down. But it was a era that I enjoyed at the time and have largely enjoyed revisiting. But yes,
well, on that basis, you shoot. Tell us again, because how many times have you seen this?
So I saw it when it went out, and I saw it, well, as you've just pointed out, 8 years later on rewatching it for this.
Okay.
So twice.
So it's not one that you've gone back to again and again and again.
It's not one that I've gone back to again, but I mean, this may be a discussion for another time. But it's like I generally don't go back to the new series stories as much as I think I probably do the classic series ones. I've maybe when we're measuring the gap between them in decades, they'll acquire that same sort of comforting patina that the original series has that the new series lacks. But shall I? Do you want me to say? Well, hang on, sorry, we haven't said what happens in this yet.
Oh, of course, yes. So
you know what happens in this. But it's essentially a sequel to Genesis of the Daleks. It opens with the very moral dilemma that the Doctor poses to Davros in Genesis of the Daleks, playing out in real terms that the Doctor has the opportunity to save the Doctor is in a position where he can look to save a child who is stuck on a battlefield.
I don't think that was to Davros. I think the Doctor says this to Sarah Jane, doesn't he?
Sorry, you're right. He says it to Sarah Jane. Okay, you're correcting me on the details already. But basically he has the opportunity to save this child, and he's about to do so, but then has paused for thought when the child reveals that he is a very young Davros. We then move through a section that seems to go on for quite a long time, where the Missy and Clara attempt to track down the Doctor, who has gone missing in action. They track him down to Essex in, is it the 12th century, I believe, where he's been hiding out and having a party. And also on the Doctor's trail is Colony Sarf, a messenger who has a message from Davros, says that Davros remembers that what happened back in the day. Action then basically moves to Skaro. Davros, it turns out, is dying, and the Doctor and Davros have another series of philosophical conversations while Missy and Clara attempt to escape the Daleks. There's more to it than that. I sound somewhat dismissive. Am I also going to go first in saying whether or not I like this, or do you want to?
No, go ahead. Yeah, I'm fascinated because this is an era of the show that you are generally more favourable to than I am. I think Series 10 is brilliant.
Yeah.
I think Series 8 and Series 9 kind of build up. That there are several kind of fatal flaws in it for me.
Yeah.
Clara being one of them. Nothing against Jenna Coleman, but the character just sort of doesn't
not
pop.
much there.
Yeah. I'd be interested to know how this... whether you felt that your view of that era was sustained by watching this.
Yes and no. Yes, basically. I found this in parts an engaging and in parts a frustrating watch. I think that this probably showcases Stephen Moffat at his best and at his worst. I think on the good side of the ledger, I think... how it attempts to revisit and extend some of the themes of Genesis of the Daleks are interesting and worthwhile and well handled. I think there is...
Expand on that already.
Put on the spot there. I think basically... it basically gets to the point where this is another extended excuse to get Davros and the Doctor back in the room, having a discussion essentially that isn't necessarily designed to that isn't just it is a contrivance of the plot, but it's not being done at gunpoint. There isn't someone looking to break down the door. It's it's designed to get them in the room chewing the fat again in a way that they have not done since Genesis of the Daleks. And I think that some interesting stuff comes out of that. I think there is an interesting and I think worthwhile interrogation of the emotional dimension that the Daleks have. Basically, all of this comes down to the issue of mercy, whether or not a Dalek can show mercy, and in part how the Doctor answers his own question of would you save that child if you knew it was going to destroy everything? And jumping ahead to the end, this actually gives us an answer to that, and basically saying that yes, you would save the child, because ultimately the important thing to do is to show mercy in the claim that this serial is making. And there is this is teased out in one of the scenes that I do like in this, other than the Doctor and Davros scenes, where Clara is stuck inside the Dalek and can't identify herself as Clara to the Doctor, because the Dalek's sort of voice box thing won't process or register anything that she that registers as an emotion, basically, or any sort of anything other than absolute destructiveness. But there's also a bit in this where the Davros is watching on the screen with the Doctor the Daleks about to kill Clara and Missy. And what Davros says to the Doctor is like, he's describing the Daleks in emotional terms. He says like, it's this game of cat and mouse that's playing out. You know, their blood is pumping. They're waiting for Clara to make the first move. He's basically,
they want her to run.
They want her to run so that then they can shoot. And
Yeah.
it's basically they're describing like the hunting. Davros is describing the hunting instinct. And then he says, you know, isn't that the essence of life itself? So Davros is sort of returning to returning to the issue of the Daleks and their emotional inner life, in terms of saying that actually that hunter-killer instinct that they have is quite a pure form of emotion that he has left in them. He's not saying... He's not taking the earlier view, which is that he's eradicated all weakness, which is any form of emotion, but he's really drilled into them what he considers the primal survival emotion in them, and that is something that he finds emotionally enriching. I think that these scenes... I think, you know, it also helps that in these sort of one-on-one scenes, it's... It's such a horrible thing to say, but it's not Sylvester McCoy and Terry Malloy having the exchange. It's Peter Capaldi and Julian Bleach, who I think is very, very good as Davros.
Yes.
He's extremely good as Davros, and I think Peter Capaldi is one of the best actors to have played the role. I think in terms of the amount of the layers that he brings to it. So those scenes. Like are a really good watch, I think, in terms of seeing these two actors and these two characters go at it, and that there is more interesting kind of sort of emotional philosophical intel at play. That said, I find the plot incredibly frustrating and irritating. It hinges on a string of both contrivances and also... like basically the whole resolution is a cascading series of like, oh, I knew you were going to do this, so I did this. But I knew you were going to double cross me this way, so I did this. Which is essentially how the farce mechanic that Moffat uses to wrap up Curse of Fatal Death, which is like, you know, the Doctor and Jonathan Pryce's master is like, well, I went back in time and bribed the architect. You know, it's that model that plays out. Also, the pacing is all over the shop here. It seems to take almost an eternity for the plot to actually start. I find all of the scenes in Essex to be pretty interminable. I find most of the scenes where it's Clara and Missy trading barbs to be possibly even more interminable. And there is, frankly, a hell of a lot of indulgent showboating to no particular end. I mean, it's like that first episode burns through money and locations, but essentially acknowledges the fact that all of these characters are just looking for an entry point into the plot. You know, it's like the point of this is to get the Doctor and Davros back in the room, which could have been a very small, very... You could do that incredibly economically.
Oh yeah, I mean,
there's a ton of wasted time, and I might add money.
It would almost be better
that.
as a sort of Vladimir and Estragon to handle. Like...
Totally, or a sort of like mid-90 type situation where these two guys are trapped together. So there's a lot to like about it. I think in terms of certainly there's a lot I liked about it in terms of what it's trying to do and some of what it... I mean, Moffat is a good dramatist, I think, when he pulls his finger out and does it. And so I think those conversations really do sort of crackle in a way that I find quite productive. There is also a lot of wasted time, and I suspect the whole thing doesn't amount to a hill of beans. But bits of it are very good, I think. I've talked a lot, John.
No.
What do you think?
I loathed this.
Oh wow!
I was extremely annoyed by it.
Oh, okay.
And I must say,
I'm not surprised.
I'm annoyed by it because I found myself annoyed by it in much the same way that I'm annoyed by a lot of the Chibnall era. In that, I think it's even more annoying that with just a few more passes and a few elegant cuts and a few contrivances sort of needed out of this, it could have been really quite interesting. But the self-indulgence just, I feel, completely holds it beneath the waterline.
Right.
I don't find the emotional delving into the Dalek as compelling as you do. Indeed, I find the sort of David Attenborough-esque kind of narration that Davros gives to what the Dalek is thinking, I find it banally reductive compared to, and perhaps the comparison is slightly unfair because this is hot off the heels of watching Genesis, compared to the layers.
No, Moffat's inviting the comparison though. You don't try and do a direct sequel to Genesis. And,
there's literally clips of Genesis in this, right? It's
I love the fact that Davros is clearly sitting on his office in Skaro watching old episodes of Doctor Who.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I find that kind of sort of atavistic, primal sense. Yes, of course, that's part of any sense of evil and survival, and it's bound up, and you can be interesting with that. But compared to the rich tapestry of ideology and survival instinct and the complexity of the world that Terry Nation has built, it just feels very reductive and very cheap.
Yeah.
Compared to that,
I would agree in the sense that I don't think. I mean, I do quite like those elements that you pulled out, but it doesn't really go anywhere other than to either be showboating or a sort of slightly tedious double crossing kind of narrative. There's nothing.
Yeah, and as for the...
It goes there. It doesn't particularly come back with anything interesting.
No, and also, there's a part where Davros' life support machine thing, which feeds energy to him from every Dalek, conveniently. Every Dalek.
Oh, God.
And Davros says, well, with a bit of, you're a Time Lord. I'm pretty sure you could, if it's sending me life, you could send it death. And he sort of opts not to do that, but then when it turns out that he's been plugged in, he realised that when Davros tricks him, but of course it's not a trick.
No.
He knows what's going to happen, into plugging himself and his regeneration life force into it. I mean, the Doctor could just choose not to do that, or could choose to do the thing in the first place to kill them.
It totally loses me around the whole bit with the regeneration energy being thrown around like magic dust. I mean, I find that even in the context of the sort of double cross, triple cross, quadruple cross kind of structure that Moffat, is clearly intended to work with, I find that just awful.
It's actually interesting that you talk about the Curse of the Fatal Death, because that also has the sewers, right? And this is sort of
good point.
It's the sewers that kind of do for the Daleks this time round, and he's really just riffing off his old work there.
Wouldn't be the first time he's done that, would it?
No, I must say I find Curse of the Fatal Death far more entertaining than this. I really don't like the Clara character, and again, I mean no disrespect to Jenna Coleman, who I think manages to convey a living, breathing person who cares about things despite every line of dialogue she's given.
Yeah.
So this is not a criticism of her. This is firmly a criticism of Moff. And I just, the whole thing about, being in the classroom, and she's interrupted. She notices that the planes aren't flying, and she's talking about Austin, who was a great kisser. It's like, oh, you sassmeister. I can't. And then the other head teacher comes in and says, you had a call. They were going to put me through to the Prime Minister. Oh, yeah, I've got to go because of our personal crisis. See ya. And I'm just like, it's
all of
this...
that. But then she goes to Unit HQ, and then there's a whole scene where they get a message from Missy, and then she and Missy meet at the cafe with all the snipers around them, and then they decide. And then I have absolutely no idea how Unit concludes he's in Essex. That's in 1138. That's like
that was clear. It was tedious, but it was clear. So basically, they decide that
it goes on for ages.
He believes he's going to die.
Yes.
So, and the typical Time Lord way to do that is to go into a sort of darkened room and meditate and be contemplative. So he's going to do the exact opposite of that. He's going to go and have a massive party, anachronistically, because that obviously he was a Time Lord. So they need to find out where he is present in human history, but there's no crisis. I.e., if there's a crisis, he'd be just doing his normal Doctor Who shit. Whereas here, he is on some personal purpose, and that's how they find him in this particular way, because they've got an encyclopedic list of all the places. All of which, so that he can come out on a tank playing guitar. Because it's just that typical Moff thing of, wouldn't it be cool? Wouldn't it just be cool if he came out on a tank with a guitar? And, like, wouldn't it be cool if he was in Davros's chair? And it's like, well...
I mean, any one of those things, yes, maybe, but just...
But just, like, all to throw them... And also, like, the Doctor's fury at Clark... I mean, we talked about this in, our discussion of... Always get them mixed up... Heaven Sent.
Yeah, go on. The solo one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that Heaven Sent?
Yes.
Great.
I'm going to say yes, just to move the conversation on. Yeah, but yes.
But like I said then that a lot of your response to that, and I liked it as I recall, is going to be conditioned on whether you believe in that relationship between him and Clara. And his fury, his rage, his despair, his beside himself anguish at Clara's death hangs on you caring for this character, and I simply don't. The character doesn't exist. She was a problem, as in she was a mystery, right? She was a problem, and that got solved. And Jenna Coleman didn't want to leave yet, so she stayed, and she's just sort of there. She's a sassmeister, and then you get Michelle Gomez, who's even more of a sassmeister.
Sass on sass, yeah.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. Like, I think Michelle Gomez is great at doing what she's been told to do and what she's been cast to do.
And I have nothing against. I mean, I much preferred the execution in the previous Series 8, where it's a sort of slow burn reveal that Missy, this sort of mad Mary Poppins character, was actually the Master. I've got sort of nothing bad to say about the idea that that's what you would do with the character at all. But it's just like, there's so much of it here.
Well, and just again, I think Series 10 takes that to a much more interesting level. Here, she's just there to sort of gurn about, and I just feel it's terribly self-indulgent. It's like, what if the Doctor and Davros again? And there's a few cool things going on.
How much Doctor Who Confidential have you watched in order to nail down this Moffat impression? This is extraordinary. You've waited this long to unveil this beauty for us.
What I will say is that it looks stunning, right?
Oh yeah, it looks incredible.
I mean, they've really got a handle on the budgets by this point. Like in the Matt Smith era, you could feel the budgets truly creaking.
Yeah.
And this looks sumptuous. It's brilliant. I've got to say, and again, to hats off to Moff for some of the things that he does really well. Like the hand mines are at the very beginning are really just properly terrifying.
This is what we've always said, that even in stories that we don't like, he will always come up with at least a couple of images that are truly nightmarish.
Oh, it's
or
why
unusual.
he's such a successful television writer.
Yeah.
Right? That image of, I mean, and the jump scare where the soldier has the hand around his ankle, and it's literally, I literally jumped.
Yeah.
I was like, "Whoa!" And it's literally just a muddy hand on someone's leg, right? But it's a brilliant jump scare. I'm sure it's exactly written like that. Hats off to Hetty Wainthropp Investigates. What's her name?
Hetty MacDonald.
Because I think she obviously lands that brilliantly. She does a great job. This looks great, right? Every part of it looks great.
And the stuff that would be that's hard to do as well, like Colony Sarf, the Snake Man, who sort of coils and uncoils, I think
I'm not suggesting...
I think that's a great effect.
It's a great effect. I think with the greatest respect to Jamie Reed Quarrel, I think his performance is truly appalling.
He goes around on a Segway and whispers.
I mean, I'm not sure there's a lot he could have done with it,
Yeah.
but it reminds me a bit of the Doctor Who night stuff that Mark Gatiss did. There's a take me to the Doctor.
But
it's fair.
Colin, I'm going to give him a pass because it's just like Colin Esaff is not a character; he's a special effect.
Yeah,
and a good one, I would add.
You're a special effect, Matt. Not a very special one.
I've been entirely added in post. John is recording this podcast against a green screen.
No, seriously. And look, and again, to give Moff his dues, particularly as a sitcom writer, when there's a point where Missy has some reason to be sniffy about Davros, and she said, I'll scratch his eye out.
Yeah.
It's the fact that it's eye and not eyes. It's just there's some lovely little pops like that, and there's a couple of gags.
The only chair on Skaro joke is a good joke.
And that's the really funny thing. That's
a good joke.
It's a great joke, but the other thing that really annoyed me is that the bit that's meant to get them to bond is the joke where he says, "You're not a very good doctor." But the chair joke is so much funnier.
Yeah.
Dude, the only other chair on Skaro, that's such a good joke. And I did like that. But I can't get over the self-indulgence, the cut here, the Indiana Jones place-to-place stuff, like the kind of cantina thing that they go to at the beginning. It just, if you're going to follow up Terry Nation's bolted on classic, I mean, this is the televisual equivalent of a parlor game. It's everything that people start getting annoyed with Sherlock about, which is being concurrently written and sort of big part of the zeitgeist. And it's just that that television as parlor game thing. It's terribly self-indulgent, and the characters are there to sort of pose and not really to exist. And I feel that is particularly fatal when Moff's entire driving spirit in this is to sort of take... If you see this as a two-hander, right? You've got Genesis of the Daleks, which is intensely political, and here he wants to talk about the emotional beats of that same box of ideas, right?
Yeah.
But he's too busy fiddle-arsing about with his smart-ass ideas and bouncing from place to place and feeling smart. And actually, like you said, the plot of Genesis of the Daleks, even if you think it flags a bit from... It's bolted on. There's nothing that illogically happens when... What is this really? He plugs himself down, but I knew you were going to do... Oh, but I knew you were going to do that. Oh, but I knew you were going to do that. And to what end? What actually was the...
Well, that's the thing. It's it's hard to get to the end of it and really sort of have a sense of what happened other than sort of a bunch of stuff, which is the thing that I think is sort of most disappointing about it, because it... And, even on Moffat's own terms, because the thing that's really annoying is that he can be really good at this stuff. If you look at the Moffat classics, The Girl in the Fireplace, Blink, this idea of the sort of the nested puzzle box narrative where it doesn't all make sense, but my God, it's going to click into place satisfyingly at the end. It's a triumph, and you would gladly watch him. I mean, if he was going to do that week in, week out, and and play that same trick every week and pull it off that successfully, then you'd consider this a classic. But there's no. It is just double, triple cross. Everyone's one step ahead of each other. Ultimately, the fact that the Doctor's so many enough steps ahead of Davros to be able to bring this to a resolution absolutely robs it of any real sense of peril. Then the fact that you've got Missy and Clara sort of essentially sassing their way through it also robbed that.
Oh, she ties up Clara. Oh, that's a bit sexy. It's a bit dangerous, isn't it? Ooh.
There's,
so dull.
But there are, I personally feel there are a couple of decent moments of drama in this, which is, for me, what means that I probably don't loathe this as much as you do. I think the scene with Clara and the Dalek is, and it's partly also down to performances and direction. I find genuinely quite tense and unsettling.
Not even the first time he's done that, is it?
No, it's certainly not the first time Jenna Coleman's been
inside a Dalek.
I wish there was a better way of that. No, I stand by that. That is an apt description of what she does over a couple of years.
Repeatedly.
Hey, what she does on her own time's up to her.
Yeah.
And I think there is. I suppose the other thing is it's interesting that the sort of Davros's anthropological read on the Daleks didn't work for you, but it's interesting watching classic Doctor Who monsters regenerate because they've been given a burst of regeneration energy. We have regenerating Daleks in this. A few years later, we get regenerating Cybermen, courtesy of Chris Chibnall. And I think, in a way to sort
You're right, this is a triumph.
in a way to sort of totally cheapen. I'm going to take a little side quest into sort of regeneration here, right? This is sort of boxing off a general other bugbear I have about modern Doctor Who in general. The classic series is very sparing on regeneration in that it happens at the changeover of actor. Also, just different production teams, different approaches to effects. They look different every time, so they're sort of treated always slightly differently. The only other thing that you see in classic series Doctor Who, I believe, is a proper Time Lord regeneration is Romana's regeneration, which is played for laughs as she comes out with a complete different set of bodies before deciding one to light on. But basically, the classic series is very sparing with regeneration. In modern Doctor Who, not only do you get the Doctor changeovers, but you get to see the Derek Jacobi Master regenerate into John Sim. You get David Tennant's fake-out regeneration. You get Time Lord General regenerating at the end of this series into the younger woman. You get multiple regenerations throughout the whole Timeless Child. I mean, it's like that effect is starting to feel very familiar when it's like,
yeah.
And I'm sure there's a bunch of others that I've missed there. And that's because, and this sort of slightly ties back to what I was saying.
Isn't there River Song as well?
Yes, River Song, thank you. Several times, in fact, in one story. The fact that, and this sort of, I talked a few weeks ago about when they brought the Master back, about how Doctor Who sort of, when the mythology becomes a sort of a crutch for the show. This will be dramatic because it's another Time Lord or because we're going back to Gallifrey. And it's sort of like this idea that if you want a cheap hit of dramatic drama, oh my God, it's the regeneration effect, someone's going to regenerate. But it's played again and again to the point where it's absolutely ludicrous here where the Doctor's, using a little burst of regeneration energy to try and heal Davros, and it's part of his plan, blah, blah, blah. It's absolutely bonkers when you start to see Cybermen regenerating left, right, and centre a few years later in the Chibnall story. But also, in terms of a total cheapening of it, when a Dalek regenerates, it looks exactly the same, as does a Cyberman. When a Cyberman regenerates, it looks
gets
exactly
a collar.
the same. Oh, they get collars, yeah. But, you don't even have the drama of, get a good new actor in, which is sort of the point of what it's meant to do. So it's at the point where it's just the mythology of Doctor Who is just being raided for cheap dramatic hits here, and that's one of the things that I find the new series has. I mean, it's gone to some extremely interesting dramatic places, but in terms of just developing its own mythology, it really sort of hasn't in any era.
But just to be clear, you liked this.
No, I think I liked it more than you. I think we're in that split in the difference. I mean, it's a very. There were bits of it as I was watching it that I thought this is pretty good. Some of which was down to the acting. Some of which I think there are some well written scenes. I think the direction, as you have said, is excellent. But at the end of it, I was like, that was awful. It's sort of like the. it's like a very unsatisfying meal that occasionally has some pleasant flavors. That's horrible.
You can take the pleasant flavors and you can keep them. This was 90 minutes of pure frustration for me.
He does not see himself at any point as the evil dictator. He does not see himself as evil. He's got a very specific agenda. He is doing something. He's not setting out to be evil today. He has a plan, and his plan is to keep his own species safe by sealing them inside tanks.
Well, it's always good to end a series on an absolute slam, isn't it? So yeah, we are approaching the curtain call for Series 3 of I'll Explain Later.
I can't believe we got here.
Yeah. And I can't believe what else got here, which is I'll Explain Later's Question of the Week, which
yes!
we did more or less manage to make it through the entire series with coming up with something to say about these questions that I think of on the way
because just to recap, in an attempt to align the production of I'll Explain Later with our lazy approach to life in general, we went from 3 stories down to 2, but decided
shovel in this old tat at the end of each episode to get the minutage up.
So that way you keep the 3 structure, the 3 act structure, but without us having to watch hours more Doctor Who. So
perfect.
Yeah, everyone's a winner apart from the listener.
Well, let's see if this format point makes it to another series. But in the meantime, our final question of the week, John, is about sequels because this is the sequel special.
Ah, yes.
Fair to say that Moffat was taking a big old swing in giving us a sequel to Genesis of the Daleks.
Swing and a miss.
Swing and a miss, exactly. It also looks apparent from what we know at time of recording that we will be seeing, as part of Doctor Who's 60th anniversary celebrations later this year, the return of the Toymaker.
Yes.
To Doctor Who. Whether or not these episodes form much of a sequel to the Celestial Toymaker, whether it's just a return to the character, just remains to be seen. But sequels, they're on the table. It's something that modern Doctor Who is prepared to do. So I was going to ask John, what classic Doctor Who story do you think deserves a sequel, either in terms of its story or its themes being revisited in the modern series?
So I actually have 3 that I thought.
Bloody hell.
So buckle up.
Okay.
But no, seriously, I thought my first thought was Midnight, because obviously that's basically my favourite episode.
Okay.
I think it's absolutely astonishing, and
it's not a classic Doctor Who story in terms of the.
No, maybe that's why I like it. Maybe that's why I like it so much.
Is it a classic or is it a classic?
No, it's a classic.
It's a classic.
It's not a typical episode. No, that's true. But the monster is so the disembodied monster and what it does, mirroring and copying other people's voices, is so fundamentally creepy. Yeah, and obviously Leslie Sharp, who does the lion's share of that stuff. Yeah. Is so good and so terrifying. So obviously we wouldn't get to see her again, but if that malevolent creature somehow managed to get off that diamond planet, whatever it was, and I don't know, maybe take over lots of people at the same time or something like that.
Just present day London.
Yeah, something like that. But I fear that this is the kind of thing that is guaranteed diminishing returns. So I sort of feel that maybe that's not a good idea. But I would like to see someone try, and RTD is back. So if anyone has the chops to do it, I think it would be the man himself. The second one I thought was a bit of a cheat because it's one we very recently talked about, but Robots of Death.
Oh, okay.
Because obviously we talked about how prescient it was and how amazingly layered the class-based society was with the service robots and the kind of the kind of mix of the curious Murder on the Orient Express mix of people from different classes, different backgrounds, but nonetheless kind of this resource curse sort of thing going on where they haven't really developed very much sort of social fabric to knit them all together because they've got these resources and they've got the robots doing all the work for them. And we talked about how that intersected with AI, Taron Capel and his belief in the primacy of the technology above all else. And, I don't think that there's anyone out there at the moment who would fill that kind of role in the real world. So it'd just be a great opportunity to explore what the world could be like if someone it did go mad with that kind of power, wealth, and technological capability at their hands.
Well, it is interesting, and I suppose this is a slight risk with this question of the week, that we are perhaps going to broadcast our ignorance of some of the ancillary material. I believe that the societal setting of Robots of Death did get its own spin-off series of semi-official audios at some point.
Oh, really?
Someone's done a deep dive onto that society. I couldn't really tell you much more about it than that.
Well, let's dig into that for Series 12 of I'll Explain Later.
Well, I mean, it's the other thing that it's whether or not, in terms of doing a sequel to Robots of Death, it's whether or not that in going down that route, whether you're just delving into the sort of the internal mythology of it, which I'm sure would be very interesting, or coming back with anything to say about here and now, which is the thing that I found really arresting about Robots of Death. That it's like, oh Jesus, they're talking to this present moment. So go on, you had a third.
No, the third was just obviously a fan favourite and something one that I've very much enjoyed. Is
Sorry,
no, Turn Left. We could do one called Turn Right.
Yeah, okay.
In which the UK is taken over by an authoritarian hard right regime that takes the UK down a dystopic sort of track with acts of social and economic vandalism. But it's too far removed from real life, Matt. There's no way anyone would write that.
Hey, look, if Terry Nation can go on the nose, so can I'll Explain Later.
The immiseration of the UK.
Interesting, though. I only had one, but I was perhaps thinking thematically along similar lines to you. I was sort of casting around for like Doctor Who stories that really sort of blaze a trail doing something that Doctor Who then never attempts again. And I came back to The Mind Robber, which obviously is all set in the land of fiction, but it's fiction become real, and the Doctor and Jamie and Zoe sort of have to navigate genuinely dangerous situations through an understanding of myth and narrative, and it's extremely metatextual. And I'm not going to come up with a fully fledged story for how this would work, but I kind of think that the land of fiction setting could play quite interestingly in a modern era where the very question of what is real and what is narrative and how that's sort of those layers are imposed on things now. I think revisiting the land of fiction and not just making it all about the classics of literature, but sort of blending that idea of almost fake news to an extent. I think there might be something interesting to be said there. But I'm not a sophisticated writer of drama, so it's not going to be me that does it.
I mean, you're not sophisticated anything.
No.
But what I would say is, I think that's an excellent idea. I just don't want Moff to get anywhere near it.
No. Totally, 100%.
Because it will disappear so firmly up its fundament that...
I think there have been... I think some of the novels have done a return to the land of fiction. I'm not sure. I feel there was a new adventure at some point that did that. But I find it interesting that that happened, and really it's been left on the table since. No one's gone back to that idea. Possibly because it's very weird for Doctor Who. But
I think we're
Doctor
due.
Who should do it.
I think we're due. I mean, what's the Frog God Universe Jodie Whittaker episode?
Oh yeah, that one. It Takes You Away.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
I
remember quite liking that.
Yeah, I liked its attempt to do something bloody weird.
Yes.
And I feel we could do with a dose of psychedelic Doctor Who. So why not?
Yeah,
I think we should do it.
That's an extremely good point.
Yeah.
Do you know what? Actually, yeah, more broadly. I mean, just not.
We need some more weirdness in Doctor Who, I think.
Make Doctor Who weird again.
Yep.
The campaign starts here.
Yep. Let's get it on the old baseball caps.
Yep. Make Doctor Who weird again. Okay. Well, that's our campaign for 2024. In the meantime, listeners, it has been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, both of you. Yeah. Yeah.
Being with you so regularly. That sounded weird.
We're back in the Dalek sewers, aren't we?
Totally 100%. I was going to say it's been so.
Have you had your bran?
Being in your ears for 6 weeks, but No, it's been an absolute pleasure getting back behind the microphone to bring you this series of Explanator.
And even more of a pleasure for you that we're not coming back next week. Because this is the end of the series. But not the end of I'll Explain Later.
Not the end of I'll Explain Later. So I did just want to give a shout out, just to say thank you to everyone who has corresponded with us for the various questions of the week, to people who have well-wishers who have sent us messages via X, formerly known as Twitter, the only social network that we are still clinging on to, and also via email, Ian and Phil, wonderful emails from you, which absolutely made our days reading those. So thank you so much for writing in, and we will be back at some point in the not too distant future with another season of I'll Explain Later. But in the meantime, John, I haven't actually prepared any last words. Do you want to say something meaningful and profound?
Keep them peeled. Just a bit of Shaw Taylor chat.
Oh.
No,
fair enough.
Do you suppose do you think either of the listeners will remember Shaw Taylor?
We're literally falling off the air here. Anyway.
Dead air is a crime.
Thank you so much. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime,
keep them peeled.
Keep them peeled.